In the last couple of episodes, I explained how in Blender we have built-in textures, like these, and we also have textures which allow us to access a file outside of Blender. Today we're going to be covering these internal textures. Let's get started by setting up our workspace. I'm going to drag up my timeline here. I'm going to change it to the shader editor. So I'll left click the clock and come down to shader editor and left click. We're using a new file today, so you don't need to worry about having the file from the last episode. Now I'm going to add an object by in my 3D viewport pressing Shift and then A, and I'm going to left click plane. A plane essentially adds a square into our scene. Now I can press plus new in either my material properties or my shader editor, so I'll go ahead and do that, and I'm going to use the scroll wheel to zoom into our material. Now I'm going to add our first texture we're going to cover, called the noise texture. We'll come down to texture, and I'm going to left click noise texture. We're now going to cover what some of these parameters mean on these built-in textures in Blender. First of all though, we need to be able to see our texture. So I'm going to plug either the factor or the color into base color. This is what the factor looks like, and to see it I'm going to go into my material preview, and this is what the color looks like. For now I'm going to plug in the factor. I'm going to focus on this. The first parameter we're going to look at is scale. Notice when I put the scale up, you'll see we'll get more and more noise. As I turn it down, you will get less and less noise. I'm going to set this back to 5. Next up we have detail. I believe each level of detail adds an extra layer of the texture at detail 0, at twice the scale as the previous layer. I'm going to quickly cover roughness as well. Roughness controls the influence of each detail layer. 1 giving each layer the same influence, and 0 giving no influence to detail layers at all. So if I was to set my roughness to 0, it would be the same as the detail being 0. So I'm going to set my roughness to 1, so our detail has full influence over our texture. So since our scale is 5, a detail of 1 is the same as adding a noise texture with a scale 5 and detail 0, and then adding a noise texture with a scale 10, also with a detail 0, and stacking them on top of each other. And for each layer of detail, I would add another layer. So if I set my detail to 2, it would be the same as adding a noise texture with scale of 5, detail 0, a noise texture with a scale of 10, detail 0, and a noise texture with scale 20 and detail 0. So that's essentially how the detail works. Detail is really handy for creating a more rough looking texture. You can see as I increase this value, you get a more rocky, moon-like. I'm going to return my detail to 2, which is the default value. Distortion does what it says on the tin. As I increase this number, you can see our texture gets more or less distorted. It can also be influenced in the negative as well. I'll left click this to highlight it and then type in 0. 1D, 2D, 3D and 4D. So what exactly do all these mean? Well, the D stands for dimension. 1D is essentially a single value or color, and it is controlled by this W value. This essentially means when we move this W value, in this case, the grayscale value will change, as you can see, and if I were to plug in the color to the base color, when I move the W value, it will change the color. The other parameters will work in the same way, but obviously since this is just one dimension, we're limited to what we can see here. Now we're going to cover 2D. 2D will be controlled by the vector, so I'm going to press Shift and then A, and then I'm going to search for texture coordinate, and I'm going to press Shift A again, and I'm going to search for mapping. Now I'm going to plug one of these values, so I'll go for UV, and I'm going to plug this into the vector. So since this is 2D, if I change one of these X or Y values, you can see it changes. However, if I change the Z value, nothing changes. This is because this is a 2D noise texture, and so will only be affected by the X and Y vector coordinates. This of course applies for rotation and scale as well. To return all these to 0, I'm going to left click on the X and quickly drag down. Then I'll type in the number 0 and I'll reset it to 0. Also, it's worth noting, just to clarify, that everything that affects the color will affect the factor as well, since the factor is essentially just a black and white version of the color texture. Now I'm going to set the dimension to 3D. Now you'll notice if we edit the Z, you'll notice that we can now impact the texture with the Z coordinate. This is necessary for 3D objects such as a cube. I'm going to set mine to object so I can see the texture around the cube. Factor and color. As I briefly mentioned earlier, Factor is essentially a black and white representation of the colour noise texture. As for how we will be using this noise texture, it's commonly used in multiple types of procedural materials. I usually use it to add a little bit of bump to my material, or to give it a bit of surface imperfection, and much more. The final dimension is 4D. 4D will use all three vector dimensions, but it will also have a W component. This acts very similar to the W in 1D and essentially just changes the noise value, which is really handy if you animate it. It can make it so the texture changes over time. It's worth noting though, this is not adding a fourth dimension to the vector. Another thing I want to mention is that when we increase the detail value, it's also going to increase the amount of performance power Blender needs to render the texture. So do keep that in mind when you're increasing the detail value. Think of it as more detail equals more cost of performance. I'm going to left click my noise texture and press X to delete. Next up, we're going to look at the brick texture. So I'm going to press Shift and then A, come down to texture, and then I'm going to press brick texture. I'm going to plug in the vector to the vector and the color to the base color. Now it seems to have worked alright on the plane, but not so much on the cube. Touching on what we learned in the last episode, first thing I'm going to do is change the texture coordinate to the UV, since I'm going to edit the UVs of this cube. Now you can see that's already looking a lot better, but you can notice there are different scales for each object. First thing you want to make sure that both the cube and the plane are the same scale, which I think they are, but I'm going to show you how to do it just in case. So I'm going to left click my cube first, then press Ctrl and A, and this will bring up my apply menu, and a left click scale. This essentially returns the scale to the value of 1 on all axes. I'm going to do the same thing on the plane, left click the plane, Ctrl, then A, and then press scale. As I suspected, this wasn't the issue, so what I'm going to do is left click our cube, go into edit mode, and I'm going to come into the top left hand corner and drag this out. Then I'm going to click the drop down and left click UV editor. Now you can see we've got our cross UV that's automatically being generated. This is great, but since we're using the same texture and just repeating it across the whole cube with different rotations, we're going to do a cube projection again. So I'm going to press U and then cube projection. We touched on this in the last episode of the series. Now you can see everything is to scale. Now I'm going to press tab and go back into object mode. You will probably just go straight into object mode when you press tab. I just have a special menu. So the brick texture is quite a bit more complicated as there's quite a few more parameters. Let's look at the colors to get started. When we change one of the colors, it will change the respective color on the brick texture. So if I was to change this to a red color, you can see we've now got a reddish brick color. And I can do the same for color 2 and make it a little bit darker. You can notice, even though we've only chosen 2 colors, we have some other variants of color in between. This is determined by the bias parameter. If I was to set this value to -1, you can see it is now only using color 1. And if I was to change this value to 1, it's now only going to use color 2. So when I set this value to 0, that's essentially saying make a mix between color 1 and color 2. And of course there'll be RGB values in between that. The mortar color will control the color of these gaps between the bricks, and this is called the mortar. So if I was to turn this right up, you can see I've now got a white mortar. I'm going to keep it at black just now because I think that looks quite nice. Scale will control how many bricks there are on the texture. I'm going to return this to 5, which is the default value. You'll notice at 5 that everything is lined up perfect on our cube projection. So if we wanted to keep that, we would want to work in multiples. So I can just left click this, and if it was a bigger number, we could simply press shift, then press the 8 key to add a star symbol, which acts as a multiply symbol, and we could type in 2. But obviously, since we know basic math, we can just type in the number 10. And now you can see these are still lined up. To divide, we can left click this number, then we can use the /, which will act as like a divide symbol. Then we can just press 2, and now that's essentially making the fraction 10 over 2, which is the same as 10 divided by 2. And that will bring us back to 5. Again, if I wanted to make it smaller, I can maybe set it to 2.5, which is half of 5, and you can see these are still lined up nicely. I'm going to return this to 5. Mortar size will control how big the mortar is. If I press one of these arrows to increase, you can see it's gone straight away and it's made it crazy. So we're probably just going to need to add in a number manually. So it's at 0.02. I'm going to set it to 0.04, which will double it. Now you can see our mortar is a lot thicker. I'm going to turn my mortar size back down to 0.02. This number can't go lower than 0, and 0 will make it so there's no mortar at all. Offset will control the alignment of our bricks. Notice when I set it to 0, all our bricks will be perfectly aligned. And if I was set it to 1, it will also be aligned. For now, we're going to put it back to around 0.5, which is right in the middle. Squash will control the wideness of the offsetted bricks. So notice when I increase this, only the bricks that are being offsetted will be changed. I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that. Having the squash set to 1 will make it so it's the same scale as the other bricks. Now you can see there is two parameters called frequency. The first one will control the frequency of the offset. So if I were to increase it, you would notice how we now have two aligned and then one offset. And if we wanted to make it 3 aligned and 1 offset, we could just increase the frequency to 4, and so on and so forth. As you might have imagined, the squash frequency does the same thing, but this is for the squash. So first thing I'm going to do is change my squash value to 2, so we can actually see the effect. Then I'm going to change my frequency to 3, and now you can see this has randomized the squash quite a bit more. So these are some great values to be aware of. Let me change my squash back to 1. Mortar smoothness will control how smooth the edges are. So right now, the edges are quite hard, but if I increase the smoothness, you can see the edges become more blurry or smooth. We're going to want to keep them at its default value just now, so we'll just press Ctrl Z to undo and reset it to 0.1. The easiest ones to understand are brick width and row height. Essentially, brick width will make all the bricks wider. This is different from squash because it's affecting all of the bricks. Row height will increase the height of all the rows. So if I was to set this to 0.5, which is twice that amount, you can notice we now have twice the size of bricks. And this is why brick textures can be so useful for making other types of surfaces apart from bricks, such as swimming pool tiles or bathroom tiles, kitchen floor tiles, and wooden tiles. Finally, for the brick texture, if I plug my factor into the base color, you can see we have this black and white brick texture. This doesn't change even when we change the colors, and this kind of acts like a mask, which will be really useful. Masks are something we will cover in a later tutorial in the series, but essentially they allow us to map multiple materials or shaders to different black and white values. Now I'm going to left click my brick texture and press X to delete. Next up, we're going to add the checker texture. So I'll press Shift and then A, come to texture and left click checker texture. I'll plug in my vector to the vector and color to the base color. Now you can see we've created a checker effect. I only really use this for a basic checkered material of some kind. I personally don't use this for tiled floors or walls, as I find the brick texture is much more effective at creating the procedural texture I want for tiled surfaces. This one is essentially quite self-explanatory. Color 1 will alter the white color, and color 2 will alter the grey color. Scale will increase the scale, and factor will give us the black and white version. Notice how the black and white version won't change even if we change the value of our texture. This is just like the brick texture, where we get a permanent mask. I'm going to left click my checker texture and press X to delete. Now I'm going to press Shift and then A, texture, and I'm going to left click Musgrave Texture. I'm going to plug in the vector and put the height into the base color. This is the kind of texture we've been given. This texture is really useful because it's a little bit like the noise texture, but it's unique, so good for some more variation. Unlike the noise texture, however, it doesn't have a color output. Each option in the drop down here will have a unique effect. I'm going to return it to FBM just now. Scale will increase the scale of the texture. Detail will work how we explained it earlier, so adding more scaled layers on top. However, unlike the noise texture, it seems Musgrave Texture's detail is altered by the dimension value. As you can see, when I put it down low, you can see that detail much clearer. Although it's worth saying that this dimension value is different from the roughness value as far as I'm aware. So I'm going to return my dimension down to 1 so I can show you the lacunarity. If I increase this now, you can notice how we're going to get more fuzzy edges. So I'll return that back. So there's a lot of really cool effects you can get with this texture. I'm going to left click my Musgrave Texture and press X to delete. Next up, we have the one we used in the last tutorial, the Voronoi Texture. So I'll press Shift and then A, and then left click Voronoi. I'll plug the vector into the vector, and I'm going to display the distance. And you see we got our spotted pattern again. You can also plug in the color. Like the Musgrave Texture, you can alter these drop down menus here to get a lot of unique different looks. If I go back into distance, one common option I use is changing F1 to distance to edge. This can be really useful as it allows me to create a nice kind of crackle material. You can also change the variation of the Voronoi by changing the randomness. 0 will make things lined up and 1 will make things completely random. Scale does what it says on the tin, it scales things up. Now I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to select Wave Texture. I'm going to plug the vector into the vector and and the color into the base color. Now you can see we've got a wave effect. You can change the axes here to change the direction of the strands. You can even change it to diagonal to get a cool diagonal effect. You also change it from bands to rings, and you can see that that alters how it looks. Scale will do what it says on the tin. Distortion will distort the lines. This can be really useful for making wood textures. You can notice this looks almost a bit like a Minecraft wooden log here. Detail will do the same thing as we explained earlier and make things look a little bit more rough. Detail scale can alter that detail even more and kind of act like a multiplier. Then we got detail roughness, and if we set this to 0, the detail will have no influence. If we set it to 1, it'll have complete influence. Notice how detail roughness 0 is the same as having the detail at 0. Phase offset will offset the wave in a particular direction. This kind of acts like the 4D we explained earlier on the noise texture, but it does act in a different way. Finally, we're going to cover other type of texture which isn't in this node menu. We're going to have to change it from object to world. You can also access the world texture by left clicking this world icon here, and we can press plus new either here or here, and now we've created a world texture. A world texture will be seen in the rendered view. You can notice if I delete the world texture by pressing X here, it will be non-shaded. We're going to click the drop down and select our world again. This is the default, and we can change this to image texture. So I'm going to left click color here, and this is another way which we can add a texture without having to add it in the node menu. With the left click this yellow dot here, and I'm going to choose environment texture. Now you can see it's added the environment texture here, and if you're in the shader mode you'll see a massive purple display. Now if we want to add environment texture, this is where we use HDRIs. I usually get my HDRIs from this awesome free resource, and I'll have the link for it in the description. I'm just going to add one of the ones I downloaded from the website. You can simply just download one from the website, and then when you press open here you can find it and add it. Now I've added my texture. I'm going to leave all the settings as they are. When I click on rendered view, you can see we've now got a world in the background, and this is giving it the lighting of that background. So this can be great for quick realistic lighting. But what if I don't want to see the background but I still want the lighting effect? Well, I can change it to transparent background. So I'm going to left click render properties, then I'm going to come to film, open this up, and left click transparent. And now you can see it disappears but the lighting is still applied. So that's us covered some of the built-in textures in Blender which I use the most. I'm going to have a quick quiz now to keep the knowledge fresh in our mind. Number 1, what does the distortion parameter control? Number 2, how does the detail parameter affect performance? Number 3, what texture is composed of lines by default? You can pause the video and answer the questions. I'll be going over the answers in 15 seconds from now. Number 1, what does the distortion parameter control? The distortion parameter alters the texture that makes it look like it's been stretched and scaled randomly in different places. Number 2, how does the detail parameter affect performance? As I briefly mentioned, the detail parameter, when increased, will use up more computing power. So keep in mind that when you're increasing the detail in your procedural materials. Number 3, what texture is composed of lines by default? This would be the wave texture. Great job everyone for making it to the end of the video. If you want to comment your answers in the section below, I'll mark them for you. And if you have any other questions, I'll do my best to answer them to the best of my ability. With that though, I want to thank you for watching this video, and in the next video, we're going to cover vectors, which may seem like an intimidating topic, but I promise I'll do my best to teach it to you as clearly as I can. We're not going to be going super in depth, but we're just going to cover a bit of the knowledge to help you get, at the very least, a rough idea of why they're important and what the inner workings behind it is. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the video here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.